Before we get started, I want you to listen to a short recording. Can anyone tell if the language spoken in it was Portuguese or Spanish?
Assim, quando eu estive na capital, em Montevideo, passei umas experiências lá que, por exemplo, eu ir na rua mandando um áudio e assim, falando bem pleno, né? Falando em portunhol com meus amigos.
It might sound to you like either a Portuguese dialect with a strange Spanish accent, or the other way around. Or maybe you think it was just a mix of the two. Technically, you wouldn't be wrong. It is a mixture of Spanish and Portuguese, called Portuñol, a word formed from Portuguese and Español, Spanish. The Portuñol you heard in the recording isn't just a quirky mix. It's a living example of how Spanish and Portuguese have mingled for centuries. This blending began long ago on the Iberian Peninsula, where the two languages evolved side by side, shaped by historical events like the Reconquista. To understand how we got here, let's dive into the history of these two languages and their deep connections. Spanish and Portuguese are the second and fifth most spoken native languages globally. Spanish has roughly 500 million native speakers, mostly in the Americas and Spain, and around 600 million speakers in total if you include second language speakers. Portuguese, on the other hand, is spoken mainly in Brazil, Portugal, and several African countries, with about 250 million native speakers worldwide. Both are Romance languages of the Indo-European family, which evolved from Vulgar Latin spoken on the Iberian Peninsula. Let's rewind to history. In 218 BC, during the Second Punic War, Rome entered the Iberian Peninsula for the first time to fight against Carthage. By 197 BC, the Romans had established two provinces, Hispania Superior and Hispania Ulterior, officially beginning their rule over the region. Before the Romans arrived, the languages of Iberia were very diverse. Many are now lost, but we know that Celtic languages were spoken in the Central Plateau and the Northwest, and Basque, still spoken today, was already present. With Roman rule, the local people gradually adopted Latin over the next 2 or 3 centuries. This Latin evolved into Vulgar Latin with many local dialects. Between the 8th and 10th centuries, these dialects develop into distinct languages: Galician Portuguese, the ancestor of modern Portuguese in the Northwest, Old Castilian, the ancestor of Spanish, as well as Astur-Leonese and Aragonese. But at first, these languages were mostly spoken in small Christian kingdoms in the north. Why? Because in the year 711, the Umayyad general Tariq ibn Ziyad crossed the Strait of Gibraltar with his army and defeated the Visigothic kingdom at the Battle of Guadalete. In just a few years, Muslim forces controlled most of Iberia, what's now Spain and Portugal, leaving only a few Christian strongholds in the northern mountains. From that point on, for nearly 700 to 800 years, the history of Iberia was marked by the Reconquista, the slow Christian reconquest of the peninsula. During this long period, Arabic deeply influenced the local Romance languages, including Portuguese and Spanish. Today, Spanish has around 4,000 words of Arabic origin. Portuguese has fewer, around 1,000, due to its earlier Reconquista. For example, words like olive, sugar, orange, pillow, and algebra exist in both Spanish and Portuguese, all tracing back to Arabic. In 1249, Portugal finished its Reconquista. At that time, official documents were still often written in Latin, but Portuguese was increasingly used by the royal court in legal contexts and in local administration. Among the common people, of course, spoken Portuguese was already widespread. By the 14th century, Portuguese had fully replaced Latin as the main language of government and law. Spain's story was more complicated. In the Middle Ages, northern Iberia was divided among several Christian kingdoms: Castile, Aragon, Navarra, and León. Latin remained the main written language, while local dialects were spoken by the people. Finally, in 1492, the last Muslim kingdom, Granada, was defeated. By then, the Kingdom of Castile had grown strong during the Reconquista, and through a series of military conquests and dynastic marriages, it gradually unified what we now know as Spain. From that point on, Castilian rose to dominance among the Iberian Romance languages, becoming what we call Spanish today. The term Castellano emphasizes its Castilian origin, distinct from other Iberian languages like Catalan. Even now, in Spain and parts of Latin America, many people still prefer to call it Castellano. From the 16th century onward, Spanish and Portuguese spread globally during the Age of Exploration, reaching the Americas, Africa, and Asia, shaping their vast speaker counts today.
The piece of monologue you heard at the beginning was Portuñol, or more precisely, Riverense Portuguese, spoken around the border towns of Rivera in Uruguay and Santana do Livramento in Brazil. It's considered a variety of Portuguese heavily influenced by Rioplatense Spanish. Most Portuguese and Spanish speakers can understand it to some degree, although the exact comprehension depends on individual exposure and experience. So how similar are Portuguese and Spanish? Linguists estimate their lexical similarity at around 89%, meaning roughly 9 out of 10 words come from the same Latin roots. The written languages are highly mutually intelligible. Speakers can usually read and understand up to 90% for simple texts of the other language. Spoken language, however, is trickier. Portuguese has extensive vowel weakening and nasalization, which makes it harder for Spanish speakers to understand. Spanish, on the other hand, has clear syllables, making it even easier for Portuguese speakers to follow than the other way around. Thanks to this high similarity, people living along the borders in Latin America can often pick up the basics of the neighboring language in just a few weeks or months. So that's a quick intro to Portuguese and Spanish for today. Basically, both languages evolved from Vulgar Latin, grew side by side in the Iberian Peninsula, and through centuries of divergence and interaction, they remain remarkably similar. And in some regions, people even speak a mix of the two, like the one you heard earlier. There's so much more we could dive into about these languages, so let me know what you're curious about, and I'll see you next time.